Hello, everybody. Today I'm going to be speaking on overcoming poor body image. And specifically, I'm going to be going into prevalence data as well as the various causing and maintaining factors, why having poor body image is harmful in the present tense and in the long term as well. In addition to misconceptions about body acceptance work, as well as some proven strategies and some homework assignments to take with you and feel equipped to tackle poor body image. So, to begin here, who am I and what is CAPS? Well, CAPS, or Counseling and Psychological Services, here at U of M-Dearborn, seeks to enhance student success by promoting emotional wellness and psychological development, and provides both free and confidential individual and group counseling. I have the group counseling posters pasted at the end here if you're curious about those. Those are just getting started here, but it's for all registered U of M Dearborn students, both the individual and group counseling, again, free and confidential. We also have crisis intervention with a phone number you can reach after hours, which again, I have pasted on my last slide here. In terms of myself, my name is Rachael. I have a Bachelor of Science in Psychology from Grand Valley, and I am currently a master's student at Eastern Michigan University in clinical psychology. I am also a master's level trainee here at CAPS. So that means I am both an individual and group therapist. Okay, so diving right in, what is this body image idea? Well, it's defined as the mental picture one forms of their body as a whole. So this is going to include the physical characteristics, namely, am I attractive or unattractive? Am I strong or weak? Slim or stocky? Those kinds of things, as well as the various thoughts, feelings, attributions, attitudes we have towards those or more specific body characteristics. And I say specific because we often zero in on a specific area, like our nose, arms, curves, or legs. But of note, this perceived flaw is rarely, if ever, noticeable by others. And it's going to fall on a spectrum of severity, this idea of poor body image. So it might fall from, you know, it might begin with, I don't love the shape of my nose very much, but it's okay. Or I hate everything about my body. So this is going to be more consistent with body dysmorphic disorder. Body dysmorphic disorder is going to be the most extreme manifestation of poor body image in that we have these negative attitudes towards body characteristics or a specific body characteristic that is not observable or that appears very slight to others. This disorder is also going to be comprised of repetitive behaviors and or mental acts. So repetitive behaviors meaning body checking in the mirror, grabbing parts of our body in the mirror to twist them and distort them a certain way to look at it. That's just an example. Mental act, this one is often considered like comparing our bodies to others. So repetitive behaviors are mental acts in response to these concerns and significant distress, right? So this is going to be the most severe manifestation, and often we suggest that with a severe manifestation of poor body image as such, talking it through with a therapist. There's another subtype called a muscle dysmorphia, where an individual is preoccupied with the idea that their body build is insufficiently muscular. So this might involve excessive fitness or certain dieting to grow muscle mass. And as I stated, this may or may not relate to how one actually appears, and often does not relate to how they appear, in that other people can't or rarely notice the quote unquote defect that causes them concern and significant distress. Body image is subject to a number of distortions. Now, research has shown that those with poor body image, and especially those with more severe manifestations, have biased information processing that contributes greatly to one's misperception of their body size and shape. So, for instance, when women with body dysmorphic disorder have been asked to draw an outline of their body on a large piece of paper, They often grossly overestimate the size of their body when they actually lay down and fit themselves in it. So there's a number of biases in our minds that contribute to a misperception of body size. So the cognitive biases are going to encompass our interpretation of normal visual input, like minor flaws, in a biased way that results in further negative emotional, mental, behavioral consequences, right? So one example of cognitive biases involved here is memory bias. So, in this case, those with poor body image are going to more readily store into memory and remember information related to their weight and shape compared to neutral information. So, for instance, um, whereas a person could have complimented your character or complimented your work ethic, we're much more likely to remember somebody having mentioned something about our figure. Your makeup looks great today, or that dress is really slimming on you, as opposed to a compliment about our work ethic, for instance. So, this illustrates memory bias. Perceptual bias. So those with poor body image often have enhanced awareness and a keen perception of specific features. So those with poor body image are much more likely to focus on small details rather than recognizing more global features of a complex figure. So, for instance, when we see ourselves in the mirror, we're less likely to see ourselves as an entire body, but rather a figure with big arms. So, for instance, we're much more likely to hone in on a small detail of our arms rather than scanning our entire bodies. So, also, in addition to this tendency, a part of the perceptual bias is going to be that individuals with body dysmorphia often rate their facial photographs as significantly less attractive than independent evaluators. So, what I'm getting at here is that poor body image may literally result in visual distortion and perceptual biases. Another component of this cognitive bias is that our physical appearance values become so central to our identity and sort of overpower other aspects of our identity in our sense of self, in our minds. And we tend to overestimate the importance of being attractive. However, I want to preface the rest of this presentation by saying that if you criticize yourself when you look in the mirror, or if you think about how your body looks a lot on a normal day, you're far from being alone, very far from being alone. So, in terms of prevalence data on poor body image and related psychopathology like eating disorders, body dysmorphic disorder, has have doubled since 1960 and are starting to affect younger ages than ever, which is catastrophic. For instance, one study showed that about 81% of 10-year-olds are afraid of becoming fat. A similarly high percentage of 5-year-olds believe that they should at some point go on a diet or engage in excessive fitness. So poor body image is incredibly common, more common than we let on to each other. For instance, over half of women 18 to 25 would rather be run over by a truck than be overweight. So, as a society, fat phobia is really rich and salient. The average American is self critical towards their body at least 3 times per day. 85% of men are dissatisfied with their muscularity. And with this last statistic in particular, I want to underscore the fact that we are all susceptible to poor body image. Conversations about body image have recently and for the longest time been feminized, leaving men ashamed to admit to feeling these same things or ashamed to ask for help. However, men experience body dissatisfaction at really similar rates, but often have a difficult time articulating their concerns. In addition, there has been a recent marked concern within the transgender community, such that transgender persons had higher scores in body image concern in comparison to their cisgender counterparts. This is a consistent finding and certainly a concerning one. Studies also show that it may be harder for trans folks to believe that they are perceived as their identified gender by others, and instead believe that their bodies are, as a result, inadequate or not fitting the standard. So a lot of body concerns within this community. And in addition to all sorts of gender identities and all ethnicities, all races experiencing, all ages experiencing poor body image. All body types can also experience this. This is something to be aware of as well because the media often portrays eating disorders or even body dysmorphia as occurring in certain bodies, but it's just not the case. Media often portrays anorexic folks as being 80 pounds, but any body type can have anorexia. Any body type could experience body dysmorphia. All right, so what causes poor body image and what maintains it over time? Well, one of the number one contributing factors and maintaining factors are going to be family and or authority figures, people that we look up to that send us messages early in life and that continue to send us messages that reinforce those negative ideas about bodies. So, for instance, many people in treating for eating disorders explain that they have received direct or indirect pressure to lose weight from an early age from parents or even doctors. So, two people that we admire, or two groups of people rather, that we admire are telling us from a young age that there is pressure to lose weight, pressure to be active, pressure to be concerned about one's figure. Parents, in particular, can unwittingly contribute to future body image issues or hinder their child's present body image work. So, for one, judgmental looks or comments, this is kind of an obvious one, but judgment about our weight, even if they're coming from a place of concern, reinforces the problematic belief that our size is important to them and that other people will be, and that it's important to other people, and that our bodies will be used as a metric for their physical and emotional well being. So, judgmental looks and comments are going to be particularly harmful over the long term as well. And a quick aside here, humans have that negativity bias in the sense that studies have shown that it takes about 5 positive comments to outweigh one negative comment. So, not only does it take more positive to outweigh a negative, but the negatives tend to stick with us over the long term. So, this can be incredibly concerning from a young age. Conversely, however, a parent's positive attention or praise directed at their child's weight or changes in weight sends a message that one's body can be good in one form and bad in another form. So, compliments like these can actually instill anxiety around inevitable body changes. And children can fear that one day they might lose that praise that is associated with those worthy aspects of themselves. So, while parents might be super well intended and complimenting, hey, you look great, it looks like you've lost some weight, compliments can really instill anxiety and panic over the possibility of losing those features, losing that thinness. Parents often make the mistake also of thinking that their feelings of dissatisfaction with their own weight will not affect their children, but in fact, they really do because parents teach by example and model ways to conceptualize our bodies. So even seemingly lighthearted jokes about parents' weight, shape, or size, that voice can live in our heads and become internalized as the same sort of inner critic into our adulthood. So internalized from a young age, and this really does have the tendency to stick around as parents teach by example. Lastly, feelings about the bodies of others. So parents can be well intended or not even think about this as harmful, but pointing out a celebrity on TV who recently lost weight, for example, wow, they look great, they look so healthy now. So children take note in those times of the body types that get both positive and negative reactions from you. Conversely, if you were to point out a body on TV that, whoa, they gained weight, or if you were to invest in magazines that, who wore it better, or celebrities on the beach that guess who this is in this insanely large body now, guess who put on this much weight. It's reinforcing the notion that some bodies are good and some are bad and worthy of ridicule. The next factor that's going to both cause and maintain poor body image is oppressive forces of healthism and diet culture. So, diet culture is going to refer to a set of very salient beliefs that value thinness, promote fat loss, and fat phobia. They're going to demonize certain foods and equate appearance, weight, and shape with health, discipline, and well being. So this last one is going to be key here, in that if you take a look at these images, smiling, 1-800 get thin, you're key to happiness. So diet culture has this twisted way of making its consumers believe that this is the key to happiness rather. Also, it's considered a strength, a virtue, a sign of discipline when one can show restraint around food, or when one can wake up at 3 in the morning, get a workout in before work. It's considered a strength. And diet culture also hides under the guise of health, and under the guise that we're trying to improve your health and well-being. However, it thrives on one simple premise underneath all of these factors. It tells us that your body is the problem and it needs fixing. So, by creating a dynamic where we feel as if our body needs to constantly change, needs to constantly improve, diet culture benefits from a highly profitable market. And research has also shown that diets don't work over the long term. So, they're consistently gaining profit from convincing us that this is the key to happiness, that this is the key to becoming a more disciplined and strong human being. So, similarly to advertise, diet culture tells us that we're happiest and most lovable at our thinnest. So, who wouldn't want to pursue these things? It's a basic and natural human striving to pursue happiness when there are all kinds of messages that tell us this is how you get there. Who wouldn't want to pursue those things? Also, there's going to be a human need for belonging at play here. So, research has shown that belonging, attachment, meaningful connection, however you want to conceptualize it, it can be framed as a fundamental human need akin to our need for food or water, such that we react in similarly negative ways when it's stripped from us, to when our human needs are stripped from us, and that we are most fulfilled when we have abundant sense of attachment in our lives. So overall, we are biologically wired to want to fit in and belong. And this makes sense, evolutionarily speaking, it's protective to belong and to be part of a pack and to conform. And belonging also affords us avoidance of the pain of rejection. And as humans, we're wired to avoid this pain. So, an obvious way to belong, obvious way to avoid rejection, obvious way to conform is to try to live up to the standards that have been placed on us by diet culture. We have been taught that if we're desirable, which means that we're thinner, younger, smarter, cisgender, all those things, will fit in and will be protected. So not only is this a causal factor, but it's something that maintains our striving for happiness via diets, via excessive fitness, via hating our bodies to belong, to avoid rejection. We also have a human need for control. So research has shown that belief in one's ability to exert control over their environment and produce desired results is going to be essential for an individual's well-being. So it's been repeatedly argued that the perception of control is not only desirable, but is likely a psychological and biological necessity. So when chaos arises, there's uncertainty, we feel out of control. However, one way that we can one way that we can reclaim control is to strictly control our bodies. And oftentimes, eating disorder patients report that they feel relief when they restrict. They feel in control when they restrict their intake, or when they force themselves to engage in excessive fitness. So hating our bodies can feel like we're in control. Hating our bodies and pursuing this image of perfection promoted by diet culture can become a coping mechanism that reinforces or fulfills rather our need for control. and it's an illusion, right? There's also an illusion of power, similar to our human need for control. There's also an illusion of power when we have something to blame and punish for our misfortunes. So, for instance, rejection is going to be a common example of something that spurs on disordered eating, body dysmorphic tendencies, and thoughts. So, and a lot of times, rejection is a little more gray. It's not so black and white as it is gray. And not only is it gray and uncertain, but there's a lot of feelings of loss of control, lots of feelings of chaos. So we feel great power and control when we have something to blame. We have a natural human preference for concrete answers. And so in this case, it's going to be easy to blame our bodies, especially since diet culture tells us that the key to being lovable, the key to being happy is a perfect body. So it's a lot easier to tell ourselves that, maybe I just didn't have the perfect body. That's why I wasn't lovable. That's why I got rejected. We have a human preference for concrete answers rather than kind of sitting in the gray reality of a rejection that is informed by many factors. All right, now why is poor body image harmful? So it's harmful for a number of reasons, but the first of which is that it's really going to foster an atmosphere of self hate in our minds and in our bodies. So, conditional love, what is conditional love? Now, this is going to be defined as telling ourselves, I will love myself when dot, dot, dot. I will love myself when my skin clears up, when I exercise X number of days in the week, when I don't eat so much ice cream, etc. And it's this somewhere over the rainbow sort of love that, I don't love myself now, but that's okay because I'll love myself when my skin clears up. I'll love myself when I finally get off my butt and go work out. But um, this and we can't be blamed for this. We all have conditional love to some degree, and we can't be blamed for this because it is a highly Western notion that we are only deserving of good things, success, happiness, when we work hard enough to attain a certain number of accomplishments, when we check certain boxes. Only at that point um, do we deserve, a treat or success or happiness, larger feats in a sense. And conditional love, when we really take a step back and look at it for what it is self-hate. Self-hate, this is going to be telling yourself that if I do not check these boxes, if my skin doesn't clear up, if I don't exercise every day of the week because I wasn't feeling well one day, then I'm undeserving of both love from myself, love from others, and happiness. And that's pretty awful to assume that you're only deserving of those things when you check those boxes. And otherwise, if I do not check those boxes, if my skin doesn't clear up, then I am undeserving of love. Then it's not my time for that. But the truth is that the only precondition for being deserving of happiness and love is just existing. It doesn't have to be conditional. But again, we can't be blamed for this because of the highly Western notion that we are only deserving of good things when we work hard enough to check a certain number of boxes. And so what is this self-hate going to do? Well, the self-hate is going to predict negative effects across nearly all aspects of life. So studies have shown that when we're self-hateful, we are the least likely to explore our full potential. So this is going to impair academic and job performance. And this makes sense because we believe that we're not worthy of those better things over the rainbow. Why would we try so hard in an academic or occupational domain when we are undeserving of our full potential? It's also going to block closeness with others. Again, the same idea of feeling unworthy of good things because we haven't checked our boxes. And ultimately, these factors and others can contribute to great loneliness, depression, and drug use. And not only are these going to be limited to the times that we're most self hateful, but this does a number on our physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, uh, relational well being over the long term. Poor body image is also harmful because it attacks our character. And this is mainly a function of diet culture. Because, as I mentioned previously, diet culture tells us that when we're dieting, when we're engaging in excessive fitness, basically when we hate our bodies, this is discipline, this is self control, and it's admirable and respectable. So it conceptualizes restraint around food or the ability to sustain insane dieting, insane fitness as discipline. So we're really set up to fail because research shows, as I mentioned previously, that it's just not sustainable. These excessive practices of dieting and fitness are just not sustainable in our busy lives. And instead, we're left to feel super shameful about our character. Gosh, I couldn't keep up the discipline that that girl in the magazine could. I don't have the self control. I'm not an admirable, respectable human. So when we fail at this, not only does it provide diet culture an opportunity for immense profit, because people often try again, assuming that they are undisciplined and that if they were to just try again, they can earn the respect of themselves and others. But when we fail at this, those messages tell us that we're undisciplined, undeserving of happiness or love that thinness would supposedly grant us. Listen to that again. When we fail at diet, fitness, when we fail at hating our bodies enough into a version that we can love, those messages tell us that we are undisciplined, undeserving of the happiness, and undeserving of the love that thinness would grant us, that the perfect body would grant us according to diet culture. So it really makes sense that these things are so common across our culture with rich value set in place. It's also harmful because all of these factors can lead to severe mental illness, right? Body dissatisfaction and pressure to be thin have been linked to depressive symptoms and symptoms of anxiety disorders like social anxiety disorder, panic disorder, and even suicidal thoughts. So it's going to be key that we challenge the messages that we're being exposed to avoid harm not only now but over the long term and across generations. Think about future generations of children. We don't want to instill that sort of anxiety in them that many generations of parents have instilled in their children. And of course, not saying this is everybody, but the research has shown that this is a common influence given that parents teach by modeling. So, before we get into the nitty gritty of body acceptance work and where to go from here, there are a number of misconceptions I'd like to address. So, first, it's common to conflate acceptance with loving our bodies and thinking that we have to love every single part of ourselves, and that when we talk about doing body acceptance work, we imagine that we're looking in the mirror and thinking, oh, I am so hot. I am a bad bee. I can't be torn down by criticism because I love every inch of my body. I need to like the way my stomach or the way my arms look. And we think it's about finding ourselves beautiful in a sense of attractiveness or desirability. I am entirely attractive. I am entirely desirable all the time. But this work is not about finding ourselves attractive. Because the reality of it is, like I mentioned earlier, the only precondition to being deserving of love and happiness is existing. We don't have to be pretty or think that we are attractive to feel good enough inside, despite the abundant messages that tell us so. The empty messages. And accepting our bodies does not mean that we're confident all the time or that we can't have our feelings hurt by criticism or really hurtful messages about bodies. The objective is not to make ourselves bulletproof to criticism, like I love me, no one else can hurt me, but rather I have this tender spot that I understand can be triggered every now and then, and I'm going to actively attend to it with the understanding that body acceptance does not mean loving myself or being bulletproof from criticism all the time. Because it's really impossible to make yourself immune to the messaging that certain bodies, namely thinner, white, younger, cis, able bodied, are dominant and hold more social power. So, really, until our culture changes, these messages are going to be everywhere. And so, we're going to have to look out for our tender spots and be mindful. But how can we instead learn to overcome some of our fears so that we can exist in the best possible way with these tender spots, knowing that I will still be exposed to these messages? And not caring about what others think and loving yourself all the time is an unrealistic ideal, but rather accepting what is, knowing that I'm going to have parts of myself that I love, parts of myself that I don't love, and parts of myself I feel neutral about. So, the ultimate goal here, to sum up this misconception, is going to be to be able to wake up, look in the mirror, either like what you see or not, but be able to get on with your day either way and not let it shake your self esteem or mood too much. Some days we're going to wake up and say, I'm really not feeling it today and I don't have the time to do much makeup, but that's okay because I got to get stuff done. Or maybe, hey, I'm looking great today. Cool. That's okay too. But operate with the understanding that we're going to have both of these kinds of days and we're going to have both of these kinds of attitudes towards different parts of our bodies. And that's part of the human condition. Also, this is going to require just knowing that your value is really outside of your appearance, accepting our whole selves and arriving at being comfortable, not striving to love every part of ourselves. Because honestly, that's going to set us up for failure when we approach body positivity work. Assuming that body acceptance, body positivity work is about loving every inch of my body is setting us up for failure. And so on the day that we say, I'm not really feeling it, it's common to fall into a spiral of I failed at body acceptance work. So accepting what is and detaching from the attractiveness ideal, knowing that you are a whole human being. Okay, next misconception is going to be if I accept my body, I'm going to let myself go, completely give up, and stop taking care of myself. This is a really common one, and this fear is largely rooted in fat phobia. So, before I speak more to this, I encourage everyone to check your assumptions about how your worth would be affected if absolute worst case scenario plays out and you were to gain weight along the pathway to body acceptance work because you quote unquote gave up. So, diet culture has taught us that taking care of ourselves is defined as striving to be the thinnest we can be. It has taught us that the pathway to well being, pathway to being lovable, pathway to being happy is eating salads and working out really hard at 3 in the morning before our workday starts. But I'd like us all to challenge that definition of taking care of ourselves and understand that this is a highly individualized, day to day, moment to moment notion. So I'd like us all to consider what taking care of ourselves really means. If we're immersed in diet culture, then it might mean watching my weight, avoiding certain foods, working out X number of times per week. But when we step out of diet culture, that sounds like depriving ourselves, punishing ourselves, and basically hating ourselves rather than treating ourselves with compassion as a well rounded and whole human being. It's not listening to your body's needs. It's listening to some playbook by somebody else who's already rooted in fat phobia. Like, listen, I enjoy salads, I really do. But sometimes taking care of myself means dropping by Taco Bell for a burrito supreme. Taking care of yourself, what I'm trying to say is that taking care of yourself is subjective and changes day to day. It's about making choices in line with all domains of well being physical, emotional, spiritual, etc., knowing that sometimes you might need to sacrifice one in order to honor the other, or that sometimes none are honored because you're just not perfect. So, for instance, sometimes taking care of myself means eating something I don't like or that makes me feel super bloated, but there were no other options and I was super hungry. Or sometimes taking care of myself is eating the scary birthday cake that my grandma made me because I really care about that relationship and I don't want to hurt her by completely turning it down, knowing that she took time to make it. Sometimes it means going on that morning hike, even though I'm really tired, because I've been dreaming about seeing the fall leaves before it gets too cold and they all fall for winter. Other days it means skipping exercise because I'd rather spend an hour studying in the morning than doing that. So, what I'm trying to get at here is that self care, taking care of ourselves, is a day to day, moment to moment basis, whereas diet culture conceptualizes it as a consistent need to engage in excessive fitness, to engage in excessive dieting. We've all seen the lose 16 pounds in 10 days magazine covers. That is the definition of taking care of ourselves. But the human reality is that this changes day to day and moment to moment. So I want to encourage you going forward to assess, what are my needs right now? What are my needs in this moment? And we can become really good at quieting the voice of diet culture and becoming attuned to our needs and sussing out all those external shoulds. Because our ultimate goal is to be able to say no to the shoulds and attune into my day to day, moment to moment definition of self care. We're also going to want to broaden our look at self care. So, knowing what's best for us in this moment might not be the best thing for my health, according to Detox Deborah online, but it's going to be the best thing for my mental health tonight. So, if you honestly believe that if you accept your body, you'll stop taking care of yourself, you'll give up on yourself, you'll let yourself go, challenge yourself to think of what it means to take care of yourself. If it means having compassion, having respect, having trust, this is going to be key. Our bodies tell us what we need, trust it. And knowing your value outside of your appearance, I really can't think of a better way to take care of yourself and honor your needs as a human being. Third misconception, if I accept my body, I have to be good all the time. So this is in line with those, good vibes only, um, don't kill my vibe messages we all hear. So we pressure ourselves to feel good about ourselves from the day that we accept our bodies onward. On October 18th, I accepted my body. And from that point forward, I refuse to have a bad day because I love my body. Or else I'm failing at this and something's wrong with us. So we commonly believe that if we have a bad body day, that we're defective or we've failed at this whole body acceptance work. So in the same way we welcome joy and good body days, we should also welcome the whole spectrum of how we feel about our bodies and accept it, knowing that we're working on this and knowing that progress is not and cannot be linear because we are human beings. So the whole good vibes only trend is ridiculous because granted that we're all human beings, we're never going to be the best versions of ourselves every single day. It's unattainable, it's unrealistic, and as a result, if we truly believe this, then we're going to feel like a failure on the days that we don't. So overall body acceptance is not about erasing emotional discomfort around our bodies. This isn't what it's about. Bad body days here and there don't represent failure. They don't represent weakness, defectiveness, or failure at body acceptance work, but just another part of being human in recovery from a widely accepted evil that diet culture instills. That was dramatic, but I hope I got my point across. So instead, we're going to make space for and acknowledge all the different parts of ourselves, all the tender spots, and give them space, give them compassion for the fact that they have been built up by years of exposure to diet culture and other influences. And human needs, again. We have this human need for belonging, human need for control. So give yourself compassion with the understanding that you responded in the only way you knew that you could, or the only way you thought you could. We're also simultaneously going to celebrate the humanness of recovery, the humanness of feelings that exist on both sides of the spectrum, because this is ultimately going to give us freedom and peace and space to recover. Another misconception, and the last one I've got here, is that body acceptance work is a one and done job. That, if we assume that if we read some books, follow some body pause Instagram accounts, we should feel better. But that's just not true, because until our culture changes, we're going to constantly have these messages reinforced. So some of this stuff has been here for decades and reinforced by well-intended parents, well-intended authority figures in our lives, as well as those human needs for belonging and control. And so instead of assuming that this is a one and done job, again, let's adopt the fact that that healing is not linear. Rather, you're always going to have this tender spot in you, as most people do, for the record. Most people have this tender spot about our physique within them. And it's a part of you that you have to have compassion for and be sensitive to, knowing where it came from, knowing that it's not your fault. It was never your fault. And your body was never meant to be the object of blame. It is possible to get to the point where we don't think all that much about our bodies anymore or at all, so don't be mistaken. But we always have to acknowledge and have compassion for that tender spot and knowing that it's almost ubiquitous to the human condition living in diet culture. So, what we've all been waiting for, what are some steps that we can take on this body acceptance work? So, the first is going to be to forgive yourself. And I've already alluded to this. Forgive the old you before you started this work that was exposed to diet culture, who genuinely believed that self hatred in the form of starving yourself or working on excessive fitness rather than taking care of yourself in the way you needed in that moment. Forgive the old you that genuinely thought that could help you achieve happiness and self love and to avoid abandonment because it wasn't your fault. It was the fault of internalized oppression and upbringing. And you can tell yourself compassionately that, I was just trying to get that love and happiness need met. That's all. And diet culture has shown me that in order to fulfill that need, these are the number of things I have to do. These are the boxes that I have to check. So, from what I learned about getting those needs met, this is what I did. But now I know that this hinders me from living in my fullness, from taking up space, and from being present. And so I give you permission to let go of these standards. And also, while you're forgiving yourself, I'd like for you to apologize. Apologize either to your whole self or certain body parts. So I'll practice here. Rachel, I am so sorry I told you you weren't feminine, sexy, or worthy of love because you didn't have tone abs and big curves. I am so sorry, arms, that I told you you weren't lovable if you jiggled a little bit. So take the time to forgive yourself and have compassion for yourself as someone who is immersed in this rich and salient culture that, in a twisted way, is conceptualized as a strength and discipline. Next, we're going to want to assess and break the assumptions we have about self worth. So, as humans, we find comfort in assumptions. We find comfort in quick formulas and heuristics that, you know, body hate equals happiness and love. So we have this human preference for all or nothing thinking. So it makes sense that many of us and diet culture reinforces these quick, heuristic, formulaic assumptions. Body hate equals happiness. So that's one example, but I'd like for you to consider, what do I assume? What do I assume about skipping meals? Do I assume that if I skip a meal or go skimpy on a meal that I'm more disciplined or more worthy? Do I assume that the most effective exercise is driven by self-hate? That's a big one. Do I look in the mirror and tell myself I need to exercise? That's driven by self-hate. Do I assume that I will only find a mate if I meet certain standards of beauty? Do I assume that attractiveness is key to finding a good fit in a mate? Have I let Instagram become my measuring stick? So, really being honest and having an open dialogue with yourself about assumptions, knowing and consistently reminding yourself that it is not your fault. And then I want you to ask yourself, do your assumptions work? Do the things I tell myself about my body work? Do they motivate me? Do they bring me happiness? Does telling myself that I'm disciplined if I skip a meal motivate me? Does that bring me happiness and a sense of worthiness of love? So experiment at this point with detaching from certain assumptions because this isn't the way it has to be. So working out doesn't have to be driven by hate. Skipping a meal doesn't have to make me more worthy. There are plenty of other things that make me worthy. Attractiveness doesn't have to be the only thing that helps me find a great fitting mate. So experiment with detaching from these assumptions and assess how you feel when you do so. Next, I'm going to encourage everyone to observe their triggers. So I'm going to encourage you all to get good at identifying where, the places, and when, the times of day you feel the most shame about your body because these will serve as vital opportunities to let love in. So for many, a trigger can be at the gym. People looking at themselves in the mirror, posing, taking pictures. That can be very triggering. So in this example, keeping with this example, before going into the gym, you're going to want to actively and intentionally pour love in, knowing that a trigger is coming up. So this might look like sitting in the car, placing a hand on your heart, and telling yourself, "I have tremendous courage for entering this difficult situation. I will have the courage to face these triggers and show myself compassion anyway. And I will try my best to catch myself if I react to myself in a way that feeds old assumptions." So, noticing where your triggers happen and pouring love in actively before you face them and afterwards. We're also going to want to practice body neutrality because diet culture and other sources have taught us that body parts are emotionally charged and associated with good or bad or morality. But bodies just exist, they don't have to have power over us emotionally. So, looking in the mirror does not have to make or break your day, that gives it a tremendous amount of influence. So, I want you to encourage to notice what you tell yourself when you hop out of the shower, for instance, and try your best to be neutral. Rather than saying, "Oh, my arms," or "Oh, that belly pooch" after dinner, say, "I have arms, I have 5 fingers, I have a belly button, I have brown eyes." Just noticing with neutrality and it not placing judgment or um, emotional charge on certain aspects of our body. Our body doesn't deserve the power to make or break our day, really. That's giving it way too much power over us. So work towards neutrality. The fifth suggestion here is going to be assessing and overcoming our tendencies to compare. So let's have awareness and curiosity about the beliefs that we have that cause us to compare. So first, we're going to want to be aware of the story we're making up about that object of comparison because our brain often fills gaps. So maybe I'm comparing myself to somebody that checks all the boxes of desirability, that fills the standards of Western ideals of beauty. But we have to recognize that no one has a perfect life, right? So assess what you're telling yourself about that person. Say, "Oh, they're beautiful. They must have the perfect relationship, perfect home life, perfect work life balance." But that's what diet culture tells us. Diet culture tells us that when beauty standards are met, you have a perfect life. But we're intentionally going to want to detach from those assumptions, from that link, because the reality is we're humans and nobody has a perfect life. Also, within this overcoming of tendencies to compare, we're going to want to phrase comparison as good for them, not for me. Make that your mantra. The more we can celebrate our own individuality and that of others, the less we'll feel like we're not measuring up. And, this might look like, you know what? She has that body, and maybe sustaining that works for her. But for me, when I was when I had that kind of body, I had to adopt disordered eating habits. And I refuse to count calories. Refuse to count the amount of Oreos I eat because I know what that does for my mental health. And I refuse to fall back into disordered eating habits. So good for her. That was not good for me, or that won't be good for me. And ultimately, every moment we spend comparing ourselves to another person is a moment taking away from really focusing on our lives. And this is not to beat you up, but rather it's a call for you to keep your eyes on your own self improvement and respecting your own uniqueness and needs as human beings. So this goes back to that good for them, not for me. You know, Fitness might be mentally healthy for them, but insane P90X type fitness might be insanely healthy for them. But what's really good for my mental health is a couple-mile walk. Good for them, not for me. Okay. So those are some suggestions to lead you along your body acceptance work, but I've got some bonus homework assignments here. So, first step after this talk, I'd like for you to think of 20 things you love about yourself and extra credit if you hit 50. And you may have to reach, you may have to really stretch and think, okay, what are some things I love about myself? And I want you to be well rounded here. It doesn't have to be physical, but at the same time, don't be concerned about vanity. If you say, you know what, I really love my cheekbones, don't be concerned about that. So at least 20, 50 extra credit. Next, I'd like for you to write a list of the things I am going to learn to love. So, all the things I've shamed, all the things I've tried to fix or entirely rejected. And then for the next month, I'd like for you to set a timer on your phone for 5 to 10 minutes a day where you address those things on that list that you'd like to learn to love. And you address them like you would address a person and pour in compassion and pour in love. So, for instance, stomach, I'm so sorry I blamed you and told you that you couldn't have your favorite snack because it would make you unlovable. I'm so sorry I told you that you would have to starve in order to be happy and attractive. I told you that you were ugly when you were not toned, and I'm going to try my best to pour love in no matter what, even if you don't meet old standards, because I understand that I'm human and that my personal mental health needs are going to vary every day. So, this can be tremendously useful to get mindful about the things that you're going to learn to love and address them personally. Now what? So I've got a couple resources linked here as we finish up the presentation. Phenomenal book here called More Than a Body. It's by two sisters who struggled with disordered eating for a while, and um, this really instills what I have today in this presentation: that we are human beings, and that our value goes beyond that what diet culture tells us we are. Another great resource is called Eat the Rules. It's a podcast by Summer Innanen. You can find it on Spotify, Apple Music, or anywhere you get your podcasts. This is an excellent source. And I strongly believe that, in addition to therapy, like I mentioned earlier, particularly with more severe manifestations of poor body image, but even with milder manifestations, it's best to get ahead of these things because they tend to only get worse with messages constantly reinforced. So therapy can be tremendously useful, but I strongly believe in the importance of work outside of therapy. So consider investing in More Than a Body as a book, and consider taking a listen to Eat the Rules by Summer Innanen. It's a great podcast. And if you happen to have any questions after this presentation, please feel free to email me at rales@umich.edu. Finally here, as promised, I mentioned I would speak a little bit to the groups that we are offering. You'll notice that they have already started, but that's okay. You can feel free to join this week, or I believe even next week before we close those up. So take note of the email down here. I believe that's here as well. So you can set up a group appointment or an individual appointment using that email. So to set up an individual appointment, you're going to want to come to the office with 30 minutes to spare, because we take a brief assessment just to kind of get a sense of where you're at in terms of mental health. And this is just going to be used to match you to the most fitting therapist. Or on the other hand, you can call and be emailed that assessment so that you can come in for your first appointment. Or you can shoot an email to say, hey, I'd love to sign up for an individual or group appointment. So we'll certainly hope that you would consider joining one of our groups. They're excellent. And again, you can still join. But otherwise, I really hope you took a ton from this presentation. And I, again, am very happy to answer further questions you might have, and would like to end with, we're all humans here. And you never know, like I mentioned previously, all bodies can struggle with poor body image, and you just never know. So let's check our assumptions that we're operating under that are informed by diet culture, and live with compassion for ourselves and other bodies, with the understanding that you don't need abs to be fab. Thank you, everybody, for your time today. I hope you have a blessed Tuesday.